The hunting ship Bloodfang drifted silently through the asteroid field, its predatory crew scanning for their next prey. Commander Zethrak's 4 eyes gleamed with anticipation as he studied the tactical display showing a small, human transport vessel limping through space. Its engines damaged and leaking plasma. "Perfect," the Vorthan commander hissed, his scaled lips curling into what passed for a smile among his species. "Lone humans, isolated, nowhere to run. This should provide excellent sport for the younglings." The Vorthan Empire had conquered 17 star systems, enslaving or exterminating every species they encountered. But humans were different. When the Empire first attacked Earth's colonies, they expected quick surrender like all the others. Instead, they found creatures that fought with such ferocity and unpredictability that the Empire's military doctrine had to be completely rewritten. The humans were eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology, but not before earning a grudging respect from their conquerors. That respect had evolved into something twisted. Rather than simply execute captured humans, the Vorthans discovered that hunting them provided exceptional training for their warriors. Humans were clever, resourceful, and refused to give up even when facing certain death. They made perfect prey for the Empire's elite hunting battalions. "Sir, the human vessel appears to be a civilian transport," reported Lieutenant Krex from the sensor station. "Minimal weapons, failing shields. They won't last long against our assault craft." Zethrak's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Where's the sport in a quick kill? We'll board them, capture the crew alive, and release them on Hunting Ground 7. The rocky terrain there will give them somewhere to hide while our cadets practice their tracking skills." The Bloodfang was a training vessel, carrying 24 young Vorthan warriors eager to prove themselves in the ancient art of the hunt. These weren't seasoned veterans, but privileged offspring of noble houses, sent to sharpen their skills on human prey before joining the regular fleet. They wore ceremonial hunting armor, carried traditional energy spears, and operated under strict codes of honor that made the hunts more challenging and therefore more valuable as training. Exercises. The human transport Lucky Strike shuddered as the massive Vorthan vessel locked onto it with tractor beams. Captain Maria Santos cursed under her breath as she watched her navigation console light up with warnings. Her ship was a converted mining hauler, designed to carry or between asteroid processing stations. It had basic defensive systems, but nothing that could stand against a military vessel. "They're jamming our communications," reported her first officer. "Ton Chun, can't send a distress signal." Santos nodded grimly. She'd heard stories about Vorthan hunting expeditions. Pirates and raiders would at least negotiate for ransom or cargo. The Vorthans hunted for pleasure, and they rarely left survivors. "How many passengers do we have aboard?" she asked. 37, Chun replied. "Miners, colonists, a few traders. There's also the military guy who booked passage at the last minute." Santos frowned. She remembered the passenger, a quiet man who'd paid in advance and kept to himself during the journey. He'd given his name as Jake Morrison and claimed to be a retired security consultant heading to the outer colonies. Something about him had seemed off, though she couldn't put her finger on what. The ship shook violently as docking clamps engaged. Through the viewports, they could see armored Vorthan boarding shuttles approaching. The aliens moved with predatory grace, their movements coordinated and efficient. These weren't random raiders, but professional soldiers. "All crew to emergency stations," Santos announced over the ship's intercom. "Prepare for boarding action." This is not a drill. In the passenger compartment, Jake Morrison calmly secured his personal belongings in a small duffel bag. The other passengers were panicking, some crying, others praying to various deities. Morrison remained still, his mind automatically shifting into combat mode as he analyzed the tactical situation. He wasn't actually a retired security consultant. Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison was a Navy SEAL, currently on extended leave following a classified mission that had gone sideways. The official record showed him as taking personal time to visit family in the outer colonies. The unofficial truth was that he was being kept away from Earth while certain political complications were sorted out. Morrison had hoped for a quiet, journey to let him decompress from years of special operations. Instead, he found himself facing an enemy he'd only read about in intelligence briefings. The Vorthons were bad news, technologically advanced, militarily sophisticated, and completely ruthless toward other species. The boarding began with typical Vorthon efficiency. Cutting torches sliced through the hull in 3 locations simultaneously. Smoke and sparks filled the corridors as the aliens forced their way inside. The ship's automated defenses lasted exactly 17 seconds before being overwhelmed by superior technology. Morrison positioned himself near the main passenger area, using the crowd as cover while he observed the boarding party. The Vorthons moved in perfect formation, their energy weapons sweeping corners and checking sight lines with professional competence. But there was something odd about their behavior. They were being careful not to kill anyone, using stun settings on their weapons instead of lethal force. This wasn't a standard assault. This was a capture operation. The lead Vorthon was obviously young, his ceremonial armor polished and unmarked by combat. He barked orders in his native language while his squad spread out to control the ship. Morrison counted 24 aliens total, all carrying similar equipment and moving with the confidence of predators who'd done this many times before. Captain Santos was among the first to be stunned and secured. The Vorthons worked methodically through the ship, rounding up crew and passengers alike. Morrison allowed himself to be captured with the others, recognizing that resistance at this point would only get people killed while accomplishing nothing useful. The Vorthons herded their captives into the main cargo hold, where a senior officer waited. Morrison studied the alien commander, noting the scarred armor and confident bearing of a veteran warrior. This one was different from the boarding party, older, more experienced, and radiating the kind of casual lethality that came from years of successful combat. "I am Commander Zethrak of the Imperial Hunting Corps," the alien announced in accented but clear English. "You are now prisoners of the Vorthon Empire. You will be transported to a designated hunting preserve where you will be released as prey for our young warriors to track and eliminate." Several passengers began sobbing. Others shouted protests or pleas for mercy. Zethrak ignored them all, his 4 eyes scanning the group with the dispassionate gaze of a predator evaluating livestock. "You may wonder why we do not simply execute you here," Zethrak continued. "The answer is simple. Humans have proven to be exceptional prey animals. You are clever, resourceful, and possess an admirable refusal to surrender even when facing certain death. These qualities make you ideal training targets for our warrior cadets." Morrison remained silent, but his mind was already working. The Vorthons were confident, perhaps overconfident. They saw humans as prey animals, useful only for providing sport to their young hunters. That attitude might become a weakness he could exploit. The transport to Hunting Ground 7 took 6 hours. The humans were kept in a secure holding area while the Bloodfang traveled to the hunting preserve. Morrison used the time to observe his captors and fellow prisoners, developing a mental inventory of potential assets and liabilities. Most of the passengers were civilians with no combat training. They were terrified and demoralized, which was understandable but not helpful. However, several of the crew members seemed to be keeping their heads. Captain Santos was unconscious from her stunning but appeared uninjured. First Officer Chun was alert and quietly organizing the other crew members among the passengers. Morrison identified a few who might be useful. There was a mining engineer named Rodriguez who seemed familiar with explosives. A colonial administrator named Williams had military bearing that suggested prior service. Most importantly, there was a young woman named Sarah Kim, who claimed to be a graduate student, but moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in martial arts. The hunting preserve was a barren moon orbiting a gas giant. Its surface was a maze of rocky canyons, underground cave systems, and scattered ruins from some long-extinct civilization. The Vorthons had modified the environment to create perfect hunting grounds, with hidden sensors and obstacles designed to channel prey into predetermined kill zones. As the shuttle descended toward the surface, Zethrak addressed his captives one final time. "You will be released at dawn tomorrow. The hunt will last 72 hours. If any of you survive that long, you will be returned to your ship and allowed to continue your journey. This has never happened, but Imperial honor demands we offer the possibility. Morrison almost smiled at that. The alien commander genuinely believed he was being generous by offering false hope. It was exactly the kind of arrogance that got overconfident predators killed by their intended prey. The humans were dumped unceremoniously at the edge of a vast canyon system as the first light of the alien sun crested the horizon. Most of them immediately began running in random direction. Morrison led his small group of survivors deeper into the ancient ruins as the alien sun climbed higher in the rust-colored sky. Behind them, he could hear the distant sounds of the Vorthan hunting party beginning their pursuit. Energy weapon discharges echoed across the canyon as the young hunters eliminated the scattered civilians who had run blindly into the open terrain. "Stay low and watch where you step," Morrison whispered to his companions. The group consisted of 7 people. Captain Santos, who had regained consciousness and insisted on staying with her surviving crew. First Officer Chun, the mining engineer Rodriguez, the mysterious graduate student Sarah Kim, 2 miners named Jackson and Reeves, and the colonial administrator Williams, who had confirmed Morrison's suspicion that he was former military. The ruins they sheltered in were ancient beyond measure, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. The architecture was alien but familiar in its defensive design, narrow passages, multiple levels, and clear fields of fire. Whatever species had built this place understood the principles of warfare. Morrison studied the tactical situation while his companions caught their breath. The Vorthan hunters would be moving in standard search patterns, using their superior technology to track human heat signatures and life signs. But the aliens were also constrained by their own honor codes and training protocols. They wanted a challenging hunt, not a massacre, which meant they would follow predictable behaviors. "How long do we have before they find us?" Sarah Kim asked quietly. Up close, Morrison could see that his initial assessment had been correct. She moved like someone trained in combat, and her questions were tactical rather than emotional. "Maybe an hour," Morrison replied. "These ruins will mask our heat signatures temporarily, but they've got sophisticated sensors. We need to be gone before they lock onto our position." Captain Santos was studying the ancient carvings on the walls. "These markings, they look like warning signs. This might have been some kind of fortress or military installation." Morrison nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. Which means there might be defensive features we can use." He turned to Rodriguez, the mining engineer. "You said you worked with explosives. What kind of charges do you know how to make?" Rodriguez's eyes lit up with understanding. "If I can find the right materials, I can build anything from flashbangs to armor-piercing charges. But I'll need chemicals, containers, and detonators." "The Vorthans use energy weapons," Williams pointed out. "Energy cells might work as power sources for improvised devices." Morrison was beginning to see possibilities. The aliens expected to hunt terrified prey using overwhelming technological superiority. They weren't prepared for organized resistance using asymmetric tactics. A distant roar echoed through the canyon as Vorthan aircraft passed overhead. Morrison motioned for everyone to take cover deeper in the ruins. Through cracks in the ancient stone, they could see sleek hunter-killers sweeping the terrain with searchlights and sensors. "They're mapping the area," Chun observed. "Looking for places we might hide." "Good," Morrison said, surprising the others. "Let them think they know where we are." He led the group through a maze of collapsed passages and hidden chambers, using his special operations training to navigate the underground complex. The ruins were larger than they appeared from the surface, with multiple levels connected by narrow staircases and maintenance tunnels. More importantly, Morrison found what he was looking for, an ancient armory filled with corroded but potentially useful equipment. "Sarah, you've been quiet," Morrison said as they explored the weapons cache. "What's your real background? And don't tell me you're just a graduate student." Kim hesitated, then sighed. "Intelligence analyst, actually. Supposed to be on vacation, but old habits die hard. I've been studying Vorthan military doctrine for the past 3 years. That changed everything. Morrison now had someone who understood their enemy's tactics and psychology. What can you tell me about their hunting protocols? They follow strict honor codes derived from ancient tradition, Kim explained. The young hunters can only use ceremonial weapons, energy spears and hunting blades. No military-grade firearms or explosives. They're also required to face their prey in individual combat rather than coordinating group attacks. Williams looked up from examining a piece of alien technology. That's incredibly stupid from a tactical perspective. It's deliberate, Kim continued. The hunts are training exercises designed to teach young warriors courage and individual skill. Using overwhelming force would defeat the purpose. They want a challenge. Morrison smiled grimly. Then let's give them exactly what they're asking for. Over the next several hours, Morrison's group transformed themselves from helpless prey into a coordinated resistance cell. Rodriguez found enough chemical components in the ruins to manufacture several types of explosive devices. Williams and Chun rigged early warning systems using salvaged electronics and mining equipment. Santos and Jackson mapped escape routes through the underground complex. Most importantly, Kim provided detailed intelligence on Vorthan psychology and tactics. The young hunters would be eager to prove themselves, which made them predictable. They would take unnecessary risks to demonstrate their courage. They would fight individually rather than coordinating attacks. And they would be overconfident because they'd never encountered organized resistance from their prey. The first Vorthan hunter found them just after midday. Morrison had positioned himself in a collapsed chamber near the entrance to the ruins, deliberately leaving traces of human passage to draw the aliens deeper into his chosen battleground. When the young Vorthan warrior appeared, Morrison was impressed despite himself. The alien moved with fluid grace, his energy spear held at ready position as he scanned for threats. Under normal circumstances, the hunter would have had every advantage. Vorthans were faster and stronger than humans, with better reflexes and superior weapons. The energy spear could cut through most materials and fired devastating plasma bolts at range. The ceremonial armor was both protective and intimidating, but Morrison wasn't fighting under normal circumstances. He was fighting on ground of his own choosing, using tactics the young hunter had never encountered. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Rodriguez's improvised flashbang exploded directly in front of the Vorthan, temporarily blinding him and disrupting his armor sensors. Williams emerged from concealment to attack the alien's weapon arm with a salvaged metal pipe. Morrison struck from behind, using a combat knife to find the weak points in the ceremonial armor that Kim had identified. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. The young Vorthan was skilled and dangerous, but he'd been trained for individual duels with terrified prey, not coordinated ambush by professional warriors. Morrison's knife found the gap between helmet and neck armor, and the hunter dropped without having had time to call for assistance. "One down," Morrison said quietly, already moving to strip the alien's equipment. The energy spear was too heavy for human use, but the power cells could be adapted for other purposes. The armor contained useful electronics, and the alien's communication device would let them monitor enemy transmissions. The second hunter arrived 20 minutes later, drawn by the same false trail Morrison had used to lure the first. This time the trap was different. Sarah Kim had positioned herself as bait, apparently injured and helpless in an open area. When the Vorthan approached to claim his prize, he walked directly into a minefield of Rodriguez's improvised explosives. The third hunter was more cautious, having heard the explosion that killed his companion. But caution worked against him when facing an enemy who understood his psychology. Morrison used the Vorthan's own honor codes to manipulate him into a position where superior alien technology became a liability rather than an advantage. By evening, 6 young Vorthan hunters had died in the ruins. The survivors were becoming nervous, calling for assistance from their ship, but Commander Zethrak refused to intervene, believing that the challenge would make his remaining students stronger. The humans were proving to be exceptional prey, exactly as he had hoped. What Zethrak didn't realize was that Morrison's group had moved beyond simple survival. They had captured enough Vorthan equipment to arm themselves properly. They had learned the aliens' tactical patterns and communication protocols. Most importantly, they had identified the location of the Vorthan base camp through intercepted transmissions. "Time to stop being the prey," Morrison told his companions as they prepared for the final phase of their operation. "These hunting grounds work both ways, and I think it's time we started hunting them." Sarah Kim was monitoring alien communications when she detected something that changed everything. "Jake, you need to hear this. The Vorthans are calling for backup. A full military squadron is en route to reinforce the hunting expedition. They'll be here in 12 hours. Morrison nodded grimly. That meant their window of opportunity was closing fast. If they were going to turn the tables on their captors, it had to be tonight. Tomorrow, they would face not ceremonial hunters, but professional soldiers with military-grade weapons and no honor codes to constrain their tactics. The hunt was about to enter its final phase. But this time, the humans would be doing the hunting. Morrison led his team through the canyon system under cover of darkness, moving toward the Vorthan base camp with the silent precision of apex predators. The surviving members of his group had been transformed over the past 18 hours from terrified civilians into something far more dangerous, humans with nothing left to lose and the knowledge that their enemies could be killed. The base camp was exactly where Kim's intelligence analysis had predicted, positioned on high ground overlooking the main canyon approaches, with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes. It was a textbook defensive position, which also made it predictable. Morrison had assaulted dozens of similar installations during his years as a SEAL, and he knew exactly how to exploit the overconfidence that came with superior firepower. "Remember, we have one objective," Morrison whispered to his companions as they took position around the camp perimeter. "Capture their communications array and call for help. Everything else is secondary to getting a distress signal to the nearest human outpost." Captain Santos checked the improvised explosive device Rodriguez had built from salvaged Vorthan power cells. "This should take out their main sensor array. Once it goes off, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before they re-establish communications with their ship." Williams nodded from his position overlooking the camp's main entrance. "I count 8 guards on patrol routes, plus whatever's inside the command shelter. The young hunters are getting nervous. They're bunching up instead of maintaining proper spacing." Morrison studied the layout through captured Vorthan optics. The base camp consisted of 3 main structures: a command post housing the communications equipment, a weapons cache containing the energy spears and ceremonial armor, and a medical facility where wounded hunters could be treated. Commander Zethrak's command shuttle was parked nearby. "Its engines cold but ready for rapid departure? What?" Caught Morrison's attention was something the aliens probably hadn't considered: a fuel dump containing the exotic matter that powered their vehicles and equipment. If Rodriguez could reach those storage tanks with the right kind of charge, the resulting explosion would level half the camp and provide an excellent distraction. "Sarah, what's the command structure looking like?" Morrison asked through their improvised communication system. Kim was monitoring Vorthan transmissions from a concealed position. "Zethrak is furious about the hunter casualties, but he's maintaining the exercise. The young Vorthans are demanding permission to use military weapons instead of ceremonial equipment. He's refusing because it would violate their honor codes." Morrison smiled grimly. Even faced with organized resistance, the aliens were allowing tradition to override tactical necessity. It was the kind of institutional blindness that got armies defeated by supposedly inferior opponents. The attack began at exactly midnight. Local time, Rodriguez's explosive device detonated against the main sensor array, creating a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded the Vorthan guards. Simultaneously, Williams opened fire on the patrol routes using a captured energy spear, forcing the aliens to take cover while Morrison and Kim moved toward the command post. The young Vorthan hunters responded exactly as their training dictated, with individual acts of courage. rather than coordinated defensive action. They charged toward the explosions and gunfire, seeking glorious combat against their human prey. It was magnificent and completely suicidal against opponents, who understood modern military tactics. Morrison reached their command post while the Vorthons were still reacting to the initial attack. The structure was protected by energy shields and automated defenses, but those systems were designed to repel frontal assaults by primitive weapons. They weren't prepared for a shaped charge placed against the shield generator by someone who understood alien technology. The explosion that followed sent shockwaves through the entire camp. Emergency lighting activated as primary power systems failed, casting everything in eerie red illumination. Alarms wailed as the Vorthons realized their supposedly helpless prey had somehow acquired military-grade explosives. Commander Zethrak emerged from his command shuttle, roaring orders in his native language as he tried to restore order to the chaos engulfing his base camp. The veteran warrior's scarred armor gleamed in the emergency lighting as he surveyed the destruction with disbelief. In 3 decades of hunting expeditions, nothing like this had ever happened. That was when Morrison appeared directly in front of him. The confrontation between human and alien happened in the flickering light of burning equipment. Zethrak towered over Morrison by more than a foot, his 4 arms giving him significant reach advantage, and his ceremonial armor could deflect most human weapons. But Morrison had learned something important during his years of special operations. Size and technology meant nothing if you could get inside your opponent's decision loop. Zethrak's first attack was a classic Vorthon combat technique, using his energy spear to create a zone of lethal plasma while his secondary arms wielded traditional bladed weapons. It was a devastating combination that had killed thousands of enemies across dozens of worlds. But it depended on having space to maneuver and opponents who fought according to predictable patterns. Morrison did neither. Instead of retreating or attempting to match the alien's reach, he moved inside the spear's effective range and used the Vorthon's own momentum against him. The combat knife that had killed 6 young hunters earlier found the gap in Zethrak's armor just as precisely as it had with the others, the alien commanders. Death sent shockwaves through his remaining forces. Without his leadership, the young hunters abandoned their defensive positions and charged mindlessly toward Morrison's position, seeking to avenge their fallen commander. It was exactly what Morrison had hoped they would do. Captain Santos was waiting for them with Rodriguez's most powerful improvised explosive, a device that turned the fuel dump into a miniature sun for exactly 3 seconds. The explosion vaporized 4 Vorthons instantly and sent the survivors tumbling through the air like broken toys. When the smoke cleared, Morrison found himself standing in the ruins of what had been a Vorthon base camp, surrounded by the bodies of aliens who had thought humans were nothing more than clever prey animals. His small group of survivors had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of the Vorthon Empire. They had completely reversed a hunting expedition. Kim was already at the communications array, frantically working to establish contact with human forces. The equipment was partially damaged but still functional, and she managed to boost the signal enough to reach a patrol ship 3 systems away. Mayday. Mayday, this is civilian transport Lucky Strike, Santos broadcast over the emergency channel. We have been attacked by Vorthon forces at the following coordinates. Request immediate military assistance. The response came back within minutes. Lucky Strike, this is UEN Destroyer Retribution. We are en route to your position with a full battle group. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Can you maintain your position until then? Morrison looked around at the burning remains of the alien base camp, then at his companions who had somehow survived an impossible situation through sheer determination and professional military tactics. Affirmative, Retribution. We'll be here. What Morrison didn't tell the rescue ship was that they wouldn't just be maintaining their position. Over the next 6 hours, his group systematically hunted down the remaining Vorthon survivors, using the aliens' own equipment against them with devastating effectiveness. By the time human warships arrived, there were no living witnesses left to report what had actually Happened on Hunting Ground 7, the official report. Listed the incident as a failed piracy attempt. That had been repelled by quick thinking from the civilian crew. The Vorthan Empire received a strongly worded diplomatic protest about attacks on civilian shipping, but nothing more. Human authorities had no desire to escalate tensions with a technologically superior enemy, but word spread through back channels and informal networks. Military personnel heard whispers about a Navy SEAL who had turned an alien hunting expedition into a masterclass on asymmetric warfare. Intelligence analysts studied the implications of humans successfully defeating Vorthan forces using improvised tactics and captured equipment, most importantly. The story reached other Vorthan hunting battalions, where it caused considerable debate about the wisdom of using humans as training prey. Several planned expeditions were quietly canceled as commanders reconsidered whether the potential benefits were worth the demonstrated risks. Morrison himself returned to active duty 6 months later, after the political complications from his previous mission had been resolved. He never spoke publicly about his experiences on Hunting Ground 7, but his service record showed a significant upgrade in his security clearance and assignment to a classified Special Operations Unit. Captain Santos received a commendation for exceptional leadership during a crisis situation, along with a substantial insurance settlement that allowed her to purchase a newer and better armed transport ship. She made sure the new vessel's security consultant was actually retired military this time. The Lucky Strike herself was repaired and returned to service, though Santos had it equipped with military-grade sensors and defensive systems. She never again accepted passengers without